In the dead of night, the moon hung high, casting a pallid glow over the desolate streets. The clock struck midnight, and the only sounds that could be heard were the lonely footsteps of a man, staggering his way back from the soul-draining prison that was his corporate job. His breath was heavy with the fumes of alcohol, and his face was etched with despair. As he trudged down the darkened alley, he seemed to be cursing the very existence of the world, wishing for an escape from the shackles of his life. The weight of his regrets bore down upon him, and he longed for release. But as he stumbled further into the abyss of his thoughts, an eerie sensation slithered up his spine. He halted, swaying unsteadily, and turned to confront a sight from his darkest nightmares. Emerging from the shadows was a figure unlike any he had ever seen. The man's face was a grotesque mask of disfigurement, with one eye hanging from its socket, dripping like a macabre tear. His legs, mere skeletal remnants, scraped against the pavement, producing a bone-chilling, grating sound that resonated through the empty streets. This disfigured entity was not walking, nor was it running, it was crawling, each movement fluid and impossibly fast. It defied the laws of the human form as it advanced towards him with predatory intent. As the crawling abomination drew nearer, the very air seemed to grow heavy with foreboding. A vile stench, a blend of rot and despair, pervaded the atmosphere. The man's heart pounded like a drum in his chest, his every breath a trembling note of fear. With a sudden, unnatural burst of energy, the disfigured figure pounced upon him. He was sent sprawling to the ground, the impact knocking the remaining breath from his lungs. Panic gripped his soul as he tried to escape the clutches of this nightmarish intruder. And then, in an instant, the abomination vanished, leaving behind nothing but an echoing silence and the disoriented man on the ground. Still trembling from the encounter in the eerie street, he managed to pull himself together and convince himself it had all been a hallucination brought on by the alcohol. Pushing the thought of the disfigured apparition from his mind, he stumbled towards his isolated apartment complex. The apartment complex was an unsettling place. Nestled far from the bustling city, it felt like a forsaken sanctuary, a sanctuary that offered no solace. It was inhabited by only a handful of souls. There was himself, a divorced young lady nursing a 3-year-old daughter, and an old man whose presence sent a shiver down his spine. As he climbed the creaking stairs to his floor, he noticed the old man emerging from the young lady's apartment. The old man's disheveled appearance, his sweaty brow, and a smirk that seemed to conceal 1,000 malevolencies filled him with dread. It was evident that the young lady shared some sinister connection with the old man. Their eyes met, and the old man gave him a chilling side-eye. He shuddered but couldn't resist casting a glance into the young lady's room as he passed. What he saw made his skin crawl. The room was a grotesque tableau of neglect, piled high with garbage bags and discarded tissues, a manifestation of chaos and desolation. In the corner, he caught a fleeting glimpse of the young lady. She was wiping herself down, her form obscured by nothing but a flimsy towel, her gaze empty and distant. With a shiver, he hurried towards his own room, his heart pounding in his chest. It was 3 doors down from the young lady's quarters, but that corridor felt like an endless passage of shadows and unspoken horrors. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was trapped in a nightmare, one from which he couldn't escape, even within the supposed sanctuary of his own home. In the solitude of his room, he shed his corporate uniform, each article of clothing a symbol of the life he had grown to despise. He exchanged them for the comforting embrace of his worn, familiar pajamas. As he sat on the edge of his bed, the weight of his past trauma pressed upon him like an insurmountable burden. His mind was a labyrinth of painful memories, a maze he had kept locked away from the world. Those wounds ran deep, festering with regrets, scars that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. His weary soul had learned to wear a mask, to hide the demons that lurked within him. With a heavy sigh, he reclined on the bed, his thoughts swirling like a tempest within the darkness of his room. The minutes stretched into hours as he lay there, alone, wrestling with the ghosts of his past, each haunting him in its own way. The room seemed to close in on him, and the shadows danced to a rhythm only he could hear. His life had become a labyrinth of despair. A nightmare that had begun on that eerie street and continued within the desolate confines of his apartment complex. As he lay there, the room itself seemed to mirror the turmoil within his soul, a dark and foreboding place where the line between reality and the macabre blurred. The night carried on, embracing him in its inky shroud, as he lay in his room, lost in the depths of his own despair, wrestling with memories and fears that threatened to consume him whole. He laid on his bed and he listened to the tormenting symphony of the night, a dissonance of cawing crows and the relentless, stinging noise that had become his constant companion. The recent diagnosis of tinnitus had brought his torment to an unbearable extreme, pushing him perilously close to the brink. There were moments when he yearned to escape it all, to silence the unrelenting ringing that echoed in his ears like a maddening crescendo. But he bore this unbearable burden for a promise he had made long ago, a solemn oath that anchored him to life even in the darkest of times. The weight of that promise kept him tethered, despite the abyss of despair that beckoned. Curled up beneath his blanket, he closed his eyes, attempting to find respite in the embrace of slumber, even as the crows continued their haunting chorus. The night grew deeper, and he slipped into the grasp of dreams, briefly liberated from the prison of his tinnitus. Yet, in the heart of the night, a sudden feeling of breathlessness jolted him awake. His eyes darted around the room, and there, in the shadowy corners, stood a mysterious figure. This phantom of a man wore a hat that concealed his face, and his presence felt suffocating. He locked his gaze onto the shadowy intruder, unwilling to let it come any closer. The figure reached into his pocket, retrieving something that resembled a lighter. With a flicker of flame, the room was momentarily bathed in an eerie glow, casting strange and twisted shadows that danced upon the walls. And then, as swiftly as he had appeared, the shadowy figure with the hat vanished, consumed by the inky darkness that had birthed him. The room returned to silence, the tormenting sounds of crows and the relentless tinnitus once again the only companions in this unsettling night. The following day, he woke with a sense of dread weighing heavily upon him. As he groggily rubbed his eyes and cast his gaze across the room, his heart sank. There, etched upon the wall in dark, foreboding ink, were words that sent shivers down his spine. The room had been transformed into a canvas of eerie revelation. In stark, malevolent strokes, the message had been left for him, as if to taunt the fragile boundaries of his reality. The words, written in a handwriting that seemed almost unnatural, seemed to leer at him from the wall. "I am still watching you, smiley face." The man jolted on the floor shaking, screaming, "It has not gone, it has not gone, he is still here," he says while laughing manically. Suddenly he heard a sudden knock on the door. He stopped his laughter and rushed to open the door. As he cautiously opened the door, he was taken aback to find the young lady standing there, her presence unexpected. He inquired if there was a problem, curiosity mingling with a hint of apprehension. The young lady, her expression marked with concern, explained that she had heard a sudden bang emanating from his room while passing by. Intriguingly, she mentioned that she had also heard his laughter, a detail that sent a shiver down his spine. She had come to check on him, her eyes searching for reassurance. Quickly, he manufactured a plausible story, asserting that he was perfectly fine. He assured her that his laughter had been in response to a hilarious joke sent by a friend. A sigh of relief washed over her, and she apologized for causing any concern, visibly relaxing. In an attempt to maintain the illusion of normalcy, he inquired about her plans. His eyes couldn't help but notice her attire, which seemed unusually revealing and flimsy for the occasion. The moment he scanned her from head to toe, her expression darkened, a shadow of uneasiness flickering across her face. With an abrupt, almost frantic tone, she mentioned that she had some sort of job in town, offering no further details. The sudden change in her demeanor left him with a sense of disquiet. He couldn't help but inquire about her daughter's well-being. She replied, her voice strained, assuring him that the child was doing fine and had been dropped off at a daycare only a few hours ago. With a hasty farewell, she hurried away, as though a pressing urgency weighed on her, leaving him with more questions than answers.